Hi, my name is Delphine Skeen and I'm the second violinist in the Pelea String Quartet. So today I'll be discussing little things in my second violin part of the Haydn Quartet in G, Opus 64, number 4. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is measure 1. And in measure 1, viola and second violin are reacting to the downbeat that the cello gives. And just for this, you're going to want sort of strong, hefty sound because you have these carets on each note. So you're going to want to play closer to the bridge in the lower part just to use the natural weight of the bow. And don't use too much bow. So the downbeat, the heavy beat, so first and third beat from the cello really help with the phrasing and the impulse. So if you ignore the cello and just play with the viola, it just sort of sounds like this. But what you want is more of a phrase. So you get boom, you get a downbeat and then you react after that. So which is much more effective and artistic and interesting. The next thing, measure 2, pay special attention to the forzando. You're going to want to match vibrato and bow speed with the other parts. So depending on what you decide, you can use less bow speed or more bow speed. I mean, bow speed and vibrato will influence each other anyways, but that's up to you guys to decide. Pick up to measure 9, there's a little second violin takes over the material from the first violin. This comes from the first violin, and you're going to want to match that. You're also going to want to make sure that you're sticking out of the texture a little bit more, so playing closer to the bridge will help that. So in measure 10, there's a second violin interjection above what's going on with the viola and cello going beep beep. Second violin goes bum buddy dum. I mean, instead of singing it, I can play it. So the way that I play that is that, first of all, to get the most punchy sound, you're going to want to play it on the G string instead of on the D string, which you'll hit other strings and it's not that great of a register, but you really get more sound out of playing on G. The other thing I do is for the caret articulation, which is longer than a dot and heavier, it helps to play up bow. So it's instead of that way you have, and you can move forward in the figure. So what I'm doing is that in the first figure, I'm phrasing towards the last note, the D sharp, and then in the second figure, I'm actually phrasing away from it. So those are just little tips. Oh, but for the second figure, I am on the D string. It's much easier, saves you time and effort. And also, it probably wouldn't sound that great high up on the G string. So I pick up to measure 9. Second violin is now responsible for the little tune. The cute tune that the first violin has earlier. So you're going to want to match the articulation, of course. That's to discuss amongst yourselves. And just to get a little bit crisper articulation, what I would do is that I would play closer to the bridge. It tends to get fuzzy if you play closer to the fingerboard, assuming, oh, it's piano, I'll play softer, so I'll play closer to the fingerboard. It actually really helps with clarity in a hall and things like that if you play closer to the bridge. So something else that I want to mention is the little difficulty and interesting details in here is a pick up to measure 9. You have all this different articulation on the same note value. So you have dots, nothing, or a caret on 8th notes, and they're all in very close sequence, like all within 3 beats. So that's really something you're going to want to pay attention to and craft. What I find most difficult is making sure that the 8th note with nothing on it, like the downbeat of 9 is long enough. So the way that I would do that, especially coming from the 2 dotted 8th notes, is that I would add a little bit of vibrato on the 8th note that doesn't have any articulation. So I'd keep the same articulation in the bow, but I would activate the left hand on that eighth note that has nothing on it, so no sauce. So the way I get the caret going is that I'll play up bow, that I'll do that with my bowing. That way you have a little bit more weight to it. So it's not quite a dotted, it's not quite just a regular eighth note. So the next thing I'm going to discuss is the following measure, which has this second violin punchy like a punchy interjection, and then in the background you have beep beep beep, viola and cello. So if we want it to be as punchy as possible, forte, I'm going to play it on the G string, which is much more resonant and interesting. So I'll show you what happens if I play it on the D string. I don't know, I tend to hit other strings and it's not as interesting. So here's what happens if you play it on the G string. Okay, so that's helpful. And then again, the caret up bow gives that articulation differentiation, and then I'll vibrate the D sharp, which is just an eighth note with nothing on it. And in this case, I'm going to phrase towards the D sharp instead of phrasing away from it. So if I phrase to it, it's... If I phrase away from it, it's... I mean, it's up to you. That's what I was doing. And then in the next measure, I go to the D string, because it's much easier to do, and just makes more sense artistically in the register. And it's not as punchy as the first one, right? There's no caret. So the D string will give you that different color. At measure 14, just something I want to mention that we had difficulty with was lining up these little, this little accompanimental figure. So it'll help if you subdivide eighth notes. Beep, bop, 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 beep, 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 bop, beep. What's tricky is getting off the note at the same time, because if you really listen carefully, it's not always lined up. So if you're subdividing and then you play the full note value, you should be okay. So a little tip. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is a figure at measure 18 until measure 20 that second violin has with the viola of 16th notes, where you have melodic and rhythmic pattern underneath within those 16th notes. A trick to do that is that you're going to want to start up bow instead of down bow. It's easier to do the bowing this way. So then, and it's actually easier to phrase, because you want to hear. You want to hear that. So playing up bow will help. So what I do is that I play two down bows. I play two down bows before the 16th note starts. So but your violas might do something differently. But you know, it's as long as it's together. But basically, both of you will want to be together on the starting up bow on the 16th notes, which will really help you technically. Another thing to do with string crossing that helps is if you turn the stick of your bow in, it sort of limits the distance between the two strings, and then it's easier to phrase forward. Like this. Things like that. So turn your stick in and start up bow. The other thing, since I mentioned phrasing, is that you're going to want to phrase by every bar, like I just demonstrated. So like that. Okay, you're going to phrase to the downbeat. That's just a general rule too, but I'll mention that later. Oh, something that I didn't mention before. In deciding like what your bowings are going to be, you're going to generally want to orient yourself so that the heavy beats like 1 and 3 are going to be on a down bow. So in these figures, like you're going to start up bow, because you're leading to there. At 23 is a case where second violin is playing in octaves with the first violin. So when that happens, second violin is going to want to play more in order to support the first violin, who's an octave above, so she can play less. So it helps with intonation, sound quality, and just general ensemble. It like melds together more. So I guess I would play with a little bit more focused sound. Yeah, not necessarily louder, like you want to use the same amount of bow as the first violin, you want to match strokes and everything, but I would use just a more focused sound and playing closer to the bridge. Like that. But you can adjust accordingly. If somebody tells you, play louder, then gotta play louder. So 29 is another example where you're going to want to differentiate between dots and not dots on eighth notes, especially when they're in close succession. So you have two dotted eighth notes and then not dotted eighth note figure that you share with the viola, second violin and viola shares. So again, what I would do, I would just vibrate the note that doesn't have a dot on it. Like that, so it helps lengthen it instead of using more bow. So you just keep your bow the same but activate your left hand. In measure 37, the second violin part is now on the E string. You don't get the E string so much, and that actually everybody else, violin, viola, cello, are in a lower register. So you're gonna stick out because you're playing on the E string, this little closing figure, cued closing figure. The difficulty here is that you have a figure repeating 3 times. So the 2 first times are piano, and then the last time is pianissimo. So these are very soft dynamics, and it's really effective when you can make the difference. So the way that I am able, hopefully, to achieve this effect is that when I'm playing piano, I play lower on the bow, and then for pianissimo I make my way up to play higher, because you don't have the weight of the bow. So if you want to play louder, you have the whole weight of the stick helping you play louder. And then if you move up higher, you have less weight and you're going to play softer. So that's the physics of the instrument. Like that. So at measure 40, it's going to be important to match your entrance to the entrances of the cello and then viola. Even though, you're starting on the upbeat, you're going to want to start down bow because you have the slur and you're going to want to have the heaviness of the downbeat. Ba-dee-bum-bum. So it's a sort of, you have all these different entrances and, you want to match your friends. So the other thing I'll say about that part too is that second violin is going to want to stay forte because there are these little 16th notes that come out of the texture, and you want to sustain them because they're exchanged between the other instruments. So you're going to want to make sure that everything's very clear so that it pops out of the texture. At 42, it's difficult to stick together, we found, for ensemble. So just what'll help, again, like I mentioned earlier, what I was talking about at measure 14, you're going to want to start from the string and you're going to want to subdivide. What I mean by subdivide is that you want to end the notes together at the same time, because that's what'll really make a difference in the quality of what you're doing, these little details. So yeah, it'll help with these 3 notes. The more notes you have together, the more chances you have of not playing them together. So from the string, measure 40, pick up to 43. Okay, and so on and so forth. Keeps going, but it's very tricky there. At measure 53, second violin is playing with viola, this sort of downward chromatic line. It's interesting if you bring out the chromaticism, maybe by moving closer to the bridge or by applying pressure, but I don't like to say, oh, apply pressure to the bow, because that's sort of not the idea. But maybe you can press more with your left hand or add vibrato, depending on if you want to use tons of vibrato or not. It's, preferable not to. But you can modulate all those parameters so you bring out those interesting notes. So let's measure 53. So what I'm also doing that I want to mention is that my bow is slow and compact, and sort of I'm trying to get closer to the bridge and move slowly like molasses. That helps with the tension. And you do that with a viola. It's fun. So at measure 78, you're going to want to pop out of the texture because you've got this sort of celebratory da-da-dum, bing, ba-da-dum thing. I'm singing the wrong notes, but get the gist of it. That's fragmented, and that's sort of in counterpoint with the first violin. So what happens is that you're playing a little counterpoint, and then after that you join the viola in a downward 16th note scale. So you've got these two people to match with and switch your focus to. For that sort of joyous, celebratory sound, like trumpet, brassy and bright sound that we have on the E string, you're going to want to play closer to the bridge with maybe a more compact bow. So that same sound quality comes back, and sort of spirit comes back at measure 87, where you're in thirds with the first violin. So it's not the same idea as when you're playing in octaves and you want to support. It's actually both of you are in duet and very jolly. And you're going to, again, want to play close to the bridge with maybe a more compact bow, and make sure you vibrate the notes. You hit it with a good zing of vibrato. Actually, speaking of vibrato and a zing of vibrato, measure 99. You're going to want to match the forzando here with the first violin because you have them at different times. So you want to match them and, maybe save bow and do most of it with vibrato. So I'll just play from measure 87 to around 90. So I'm not using so much bow pressure. I'm using only a little bow, but my left hand is active and articulate. And then especially in the sforzando, you want to vibrate and bow speed, but a little bow. So that's all for the first movement.